welcome back to another episode of Gaming at the Round Table. I'm Crystal with Maverick and Jojo.
Hello, hello.
So I'm going to actually throw this right on over to Maverick because he brought the topic to the table today.
Sure. First, I'm going to do a hi mom moment and be like, hey, Obi. Anyway, what we're going to talk about first, because there's two big things for this podcast. The first one is there's a trend seemingly in the gaming community of the game developers, especially big ones. I'm going to clean my glasses, sorry. Blaming the audience or their community for not selling their game or succeeding. And we've seen it with the two most recent major drama-filled titles. So Ubisoft as a whole company has recently been rumored to be going bankrupt, and they've had some backlash that you may or may not have heard about. But one of the backlash things that they received, I'm going to try to read it because I don't want to direct memory quote this one, but one of their devs was quoted as saying, where is it? I had it pulled up and now I can't find it. Anyway, I won't quote them, so we'll have to trust fall this one. I apologize. But Ubisoft and the developers of Concord have both recently come out and said basically, well, it's not our fault that we have XYZ type of people who don't like our game, right? And whether you take it from a very political viewpoint or you take it from a non-political viewpoint, I think the premise remains that that's just not a healthy outlook, right? You can't blame a portion of the market you're trying to sell to for being who they are, right? That's your market.
I feel like they were basically like, in this economy, why aren't you peasants buying our game? like what? I can't afford your game. And I heard from the small trickling vines that, it wasn't that great. So I decided not to spend the money on it.
Yeah, it wasn't that great. Concord was, I don't know if it was great because I didn't play it because it wasn't out long enough to play. It shut down too quick.
Plus, it was only on PlayStation, in my Xbox defense.
Oh, yes. Well, no. Xbox.
Speaking of peasants.
Xbox? Yeah, I guess so. That makes sense.
I'm the peasant of the bunch.
And Ubisoft going broke. I think Ubisoft had a lot of backlash where it was like a twofold thing. Part of what I just said, and then their like CEO or someone high up the chain was telling the devs.
I can touch on that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So the direct one was Ubisoft CEO blames games after, or it says, sorry, I got jumbled up on it, but because the new Star Wars didn't do too well, the CEO blamed the community for it not doing well. I can kind of flip a coin on that, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate for once in that, is that certain IPs can have extremely toxic communities.
Warcraft,
Star Wars, Lord of the Rings as of recently. They're so specific with their what's the word? The lore, that if anybody tries to go outside of what they believe to be the structure, they immediately just tank it. Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. And I could say that the Star Wars Outlaws wasn't as bad as what people were making it out to be. Because for us, I was the one that reviewed it. And it's an open world game, which I'm not overly the biggest fan of open world because you kind of get lost in it. It takes too long sometimes. And you're just kind of like, what was the story?
Yeah.
But I think they did an overall good job. It was a well-made game. It looked well. But the typical open world glitches where something just happens, you wind up inside of a wall. But I think, again, with these communities is they go so hard against any change over time. And you got to realize some of these IPs have been around for 40, 50 years.
Right.
I never really understood why so many people were so against having something new based around the lore-ish of what you like.
Because originally. It breaks the canon that's already been established. That is legitimately why.
For Star Wars, they did that drastically, and it backfired, especially with the 3 movies. And that's where I have a gripe. Like, hey, I don't like, because they had such a well-written, established canon line that even if you copied it word for word, people would love to watch it because it's a live action of what they loved and they consumed. And then when you take something and say like, "Oh, we're in this realm," and then just start going, you're like, "Where are you going? Where are you going?"
Yeah.
Like that happens. I think is the response.
That reminds me of I saw a movie called Pan's Labyrinth, and it's a horror movie basically. I thought it was a magical, mystical kids movie or something similar.
Definitely wasn't.
Maybe teenagers. So I went in thinking fairies and high fantasy, and the next thing I know, there's a monster with eyeballs in its hands, like trying to murder people. And I was like, this is not what I signed up for, right? And I feel like there could be that culture shock if you go into a well-known franchise game, and then you start playing it, and suddenly yeah, there's things from the genre in there, but it's not legitimately that franchise. I
Mm-hmm.
can understand that notion.
I feel like if you built it in the world, so like I gotta think of a world, right? So I don't
Just
know.
use Star
Earth,
Wars because that's like one of the biggest that you can run
Saturn,
off.
Jupiter.
I don't really know much about Star Wars. So we'll say Star Wars, right? And think of like
Use the one you
one of
know.
their planets, right? That's what I was saying.
Tatooine.
Tatooine,
Okay.
which is in the game.
And
Oh, yeah.
so that's how I feel like okay, but it shouldn't have like the main characters in it, but it should still stick to the laws of nature that genre has, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you shoot a gun in the other versions and it goes pew pew, don't make one that suddenly is like a
Bang, 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 bang,
dunk,
bang, bang. Like,
or like
Yeah,
that. Like
let's
keep
draw
it
lines in the sand because I like two things you mentioned. One was don't break the laws of the universe, which is not the same as don't change the story. I
right.
think you can have flexibility because new audiences are constant kids are being born, right?
yeah, that's
You
why I
have to
mentioned these things are 30, 40, 50 years
right.
old.
You have to pander to the current technology, the current audience, which is children. The second thing is, other than don't break the laws of the universe, which is not the lore for anyone being pedantic. The second one is don't mess with well-established existent characters.
Right.
You can make new ones. You can even say this new guy knew that one or something like that. But do
Mm-hmm.
not go back in time and retcon someone that's already well established, especially well liked, right? If they made Darth Vader in one of the new games and Darth Vader is super weak, not imposing, and he's 2.5 feet tall, people would be like, what? Like, this is not right. I can understand that. So don't touch well established characters,
Right.
or at least don't change them, and don't change the laws of the universe or the setting. I think those are lines in the sand for me. Where do you guys draw your lines?
There.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah,
Well, that's good.
So here's another thing with Star Wars specifically that I can understand where could be hazy, right? I've seen the movies a long time ago, but I've seen them. Um, but there's books and a lot of books. So that's a lot of lore that we have no idea about. I mean, Joe, have you read the books?
that's why I said the
There's too
newer
many to have
movies
read them
went
all.
like really off of what was already established.
Yeah.
And again, this all ties back to the topic of like a developer or somebody pointing fingers back at the audience. To some extent, that could be right. But I think on some level, if you're making something, Concord, that's absolute like trash,
Don't mince words. Trash.
like you can't say like, oh, it was your fault. Like that's a lack of accountability. Like if we make something, and that's as devs ourselves, if we make something that's not up to a certain standard, you have to be held accountable for it. Like you got to correct it. Like if I make a soundtrack and for whatever reason I'm like, hey, this is good, and then I get feedback and it's this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed. Again, there's a difference between harsh criticism and constructive criticism,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like you're going to improve off of it, not just I don't like it because I don't like it.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
There's a good portion of underlining tone, and anyone that's been following the podcast probably detected this. We try to avoid political topics. I think with game development in general, there's been a lot of talk, and I'm not going to say for or against the notion of I'm going to say wokeism because
Is DEI as a whole,
right, and so that's a huge topic. And without getting into that topic, I do think it's important to remember that ultimately, no matter where you stand on it, there are two things that are not related to that, and these conversations seem to imply they are. Number one is you're selling a product, all right? So if I was selling, I'm trying to think of an outlandish example that's safe on the internet. If I wanted to sell concrete cinder blocks, I would not show up to a pool party and say, does anyone want some concrete cinder blocks? You can.
I mean, if you're at the right pool party, you might do pretty well.
Okay, yeah, maybe an Italian one, and I could say that because I'm Italian. All right, but listen, you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
You need to know your audience because that's what you're trying to sell something. It is, and it is ultimately your responsibility to ensure that where you're selling, to whom you're selling, it just happens. Your job is to make money, and whatever you need to do that is part of your job. Don't sell your soul. That's a whole different conversation. But understand that there are markets that you can market to, and there are markets that you can't. And that's just part of reality and part of business. So that's one thing. The second thing is that ultimately the quality of your product. Someone could adamantly be against everything I stand for as Maverick myself. Someone could hate everything that I believe in, whatever. But if I make a quality product, it doesn't matter whether they dislike me and my views and my opinions. It doesn't even matter if my opinions are incorporated in my product. Ultimately, is my product quality? Is it polished? Is it shined? Is it where it needs to be? And if it is, then there's nothing anyone can say that detracts from that, in my opinion.
A quality product, since we've got to kind of move along here. We've been making prototypes.
Yeah.
We're currently working on one now. We will have one out around Halloween time. Help me here, love. Plug in some pieces for me.
Sure. Sorry, I was reeling from the redirection. He's trying to save me, internet. So yeah, we will be making a Halloween themed prototype game. We're still figuring out whether we're going to release it to the general public or whether we're going to release it to like a subscriber base. But regardless, it's something you guys can look forward to hearing about and seeing in our social media in some fashion. And we haven't formally decided on the name, so I'm going to say it out loud and I can get in trouble later. But the O-Lanterns, or the Lantern Twins, I believe. Well, backlash immediately. Okay. Anyway,
I'm fine with that.
The premise is we're going to have two characters, and those two characters, it's going to be a local co-op game. You're going to be able to spool in, make minor customization to your character, and you'll select a class, and then you will go into the spooky event. There'll be a spooky end boss, and you'll save your Halloween candies.
Now, to clarify here, this is very small.
It's a prototype. Yes.
It is a prototype. Just keeping people's expectations like where they belong.
Yeah, for anyone in the gaming community, it's similar to a game jam product. Yeah. So we're excited about it. We would have had it out sooner than around Halloween. However, we live in a state called Florida. Personal information out there, and there was recently a big hurricane that kind of set us back a bit, so it is what it is, but the timing actually should work out really nicely because we already planned to make it Halloween themed, so now we'll have to release it around Halloween, which brings us to the next topic. Maybe Joe, you can take this one.
Our next topic is actually we're going to be ending our current season, which is our second season of this podcast, and taking a small window of a break or hiatus for the podcast, and then starting up a new season, which will be season 3, when we come back with the prototype and some other things that we're going to kind of refocus on and work towards. But we're just under, I'd say, 8 or 9 months into our current venture. So it's been a learning process to say the least. So for us, it's about seeing where we've come from and then what we've learned. And then the prototype will be our setup into other bigger future projects.
Yes.
One in particular. Yes.
But with
And that
that
should
is
be around Halloween, basically.
around Halloween or early November, if
Right.
I remember my months correctly.
October.
November,
Yes.
holiday season, we're coming into it.
The other day, one of my coworkers said, "Yeah, just count your knuckles," and I was like, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 8 knuckles. I don't understand. Which isn't true because you have thumbs, so I guess you have 10 knuckles, whatever. But I didn't understand. Apparently, it's a very common kids thing to like count, like month. The first month has 30 days, the second month has 31, and so on, except February, which messes this whole thing up. So I don't know.
There's
I'll
some
have to look
equation,
that up.
but
Dear
I
internet, I'm done.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our last episode of season 2. I'm Crystal with Maverick and JoJo. Bye.
See you soon.